This is the second part of the recordings for Chapter 37, and we are now going to talk about the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. So remember that the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. There are some structures that we need to define. The protective membranes that surround the spinal cord and the brain are called meninges. And then the spaces between the meninges are filled with cerebrospinal fluid, which is it's going to have mostly water, but then it'll have electrolytes and proteins. And just substances that are necessary for the tissues of the brain and the spinal cord. The cerebrospinal fluid is found in the central canal within the spinal cord, but in the brain it's found within structures called ventricles, which are just little pathways. Okay, so the fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid, is in the central canal of the spinal cord and the ventricles of the brain. And what that fluid does is it cushions and protects the brain and the spinal cord. A condition where you have infection of the meninges is called meningitis. It's very, very serious because it can potentially destroy neurons, and neurons can't replace themselves. So we're going to talk about the spinal cord very quickly. For the spinal cord, we have many reflex actions that happen. The spinal cord is the center for many reflex actions. You may have gone to the doctor and had him use a hammer on your kneecap, and that's the patellar reflex, But the gray matter and the white matter in the spinal cord, the gray matter comes from the cell bodies of neurons and unmyelinated axon fibers. Unmyelinated fibers will cause a gray color instead of a white color. But the white matter comes from the myelinated axon fibers, myelinated long fibers of interneurons running in tracks. And that's where you get some myelinated axons are what give white matter its color. So when you hear those terms, gray matter and white matter comes from the myelinated axons. Now, the brain itself, the largest part of the brain is called the cerebrum. So it's sometimes you'll hear cerebral cortex. Okay. Now the cerebral cortex is divided into the left and right hemispheres, and those two, the left and the right cerebral hemispheres, are connected by a structure called the corpus callosum. Okay, and then here we have some structures. The frontal lobe. Well, I don't see it on this diagram. Here we go. The frontal lobe is shown here. And the frontal lobe contains the primary motor area, that's in blue, the premotor area, the motor speech area called the Broca's area, and then the prefrontal area. You may have heard of the prefrontal cortex, and you may have heard that it doesn't fully develop until you are 25 years old. I think we talked about that in class. The frontal lobe is divided from the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe by the central sulcus, which is just like a division, central sulcus and the lateral sulcus. In the parietal lobe, you have the primary somatosensory area, so the area where the sensations from your five senses are then integrated and sent to, signals are sent to the skeletal muscle. You have the somatosensory association area. The primary taste area is here in pink. General interpretation area is right here. And I think that's known as vernix area. I don't know how to spell it, but anyway, that's what it's called. Then in the temporal lobe, you have the auditory. A lot of this is to do with hearing and speech. Wernicke's area, sensory speech. It's near the general interpretation area. I'm sorry. Wernicke's area, which is the sensory speech area. The occipital lobe has the primary visual area here in blue, the visual association area in green. It's like how your vision associates and relates to your other senses, you know. Imagine things that you have to do that require your vision and other senses as well, like your sense of touch, your sense of balance. Your vision will affect that. If you have your eyes closed, you can't balance on one foot as well as you can with your eyes open. So that's what is meant when you have like an association area. It's like the integration of more than one sense, you know, together. Vision, hearing, balance, coordination, touch, you know, taste even, smell. So mainly the temporal lobe is dealing with hearing and speech. And all right, so these are the lobes of the cerebral cortex: the frontal lobes, parietal lobes, temporal lobes, and occipital lobes. And they go along with the bones, but I know this isn't anatomy, so we haven't learned them. Frontal is like your forehead region. Parietal is the top and like the top two bones of the skull, just on the very top of you pat the top of your head, you're patting the parietal region. So they're behind the frontal lobe, but then there's another lobe behind the parietal lobe called the occipital lobe. That's like the back of your head, closest to your neck. Temporal lobes are closest to your ears. They're the sides of your head. All right. Now, the cerebral cortex, we went over, contains these structures called basal nuclei. Let me show you where they are. The basal nuclei are they even here anywhere shown? This picture does show you the ventricles. You know, it said the ventricles of the brain contain the cerebrospinal fluid. I don't see where it says. I'm sorry, I'm looking for like a picture that shows you the basal nuclei. I don't see one, but so we'll just have to learn it without seeing it in the picture. Okay, so we talked about the cerebral cortex and it being divided into lobes, and that they have different areas that they focus on. And then we have the basal nuclei. And one question you might be asked is about Parkinson's disease, which is a brain disorder characterized by tremors. You may know someone with Parkinson's disease. When I was little, there was a show. It was called Family Ties, and there was this guy. He was a really, really popular actor. Of course I can't think of his name right now. He played Alex on Family Ties. Michael J. Fox. He has Parkinson's disease, and he's very outspoken about it. But he was a really, really famous actor for a long time before any of you were born. And but anyway, Parkinson's disease is characterized by tremors, problems with speech over time. It's hard; they become harder and harder to understand. Difficulty standing and walking, just a lot of shaking, you know. And it comes from the loss of dopamine-producing cells in the basal nuclei. So that is how the basal nuclei are related to Parkinson's disease. The loss of dopamine-producing cells. Okay, there is a structure in the brain. I can show you this on the illustrations. It's called the diencephalon, and it contains three structures: the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and the pineal gland. And for the hypothalamus, you just need to know that it's an integrating center that helps maintain homeostasis. A lot of times we associate it as the thermostat, our body's thermostat, because it helps regulate body temperature. But it does control the pituitary gland, which is also in the brain. The thalamus integrates a lot of sensory information, vision, taste, hearing, and sends it to the cerebral cortex. So a lot of sensory information goes to the thalamus first, and then to the cerebrum or cerebral cortex, to those areas, in the different lobes. All right, the pineal gland secretes melatonin, which is involved in maintaining our normal sleep-wake cycle called the circadian rhythms. And let me show you the diencephalon. So here's the diencephalon. It consists of the thalamus, which is this structure, the hypothalamus, which is right here, and the pineal gland, which is right there. Okay. All right. And then the cerebellum, not the cerebrum, but the cerebellum is in the area of like the back of the head, and it's involved in coordination. So it receives sensory input from the eyes, ears, joints, and muscles, and then sends motor impulses out to the skeletal muscles. So it's involved in balance and coordination. And the cerebellum is this structure right here. It's this whole entire structure here. It's like right below the occipital lobe of the cerebrum. So here, in fact, you can see it better. This is the cerebellum. This structure right here is the cerebellum. All right, so there is the brainstem, which contains the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata contains reflex centers for vomiting, coughing, sneezing, hiccuping, and swallowing. And I was thinking about something totally different. The medulla oblongata also contains centers for regulating our breathing and our heart rate. All right, reticular activating system causes a person to be alert. I don't think we have a question about that on the exam, so I'm going to go past it. The limbic system. There is a question about the limbic system. So the limbic system is a strange little part of the brain. It includes the medial portions of the cerebral lobes. So in the very center, like in here. Okay, so medial portions of the cerebral lobes, and it includes the basal nuclei and the diencephalon, which has includes the hypothalamus and the thalamus. And some structures that are important in the limbic system are the hippocampus and the amygdala. So what the limbic system does, it integrates higher mental functions and primitive emotions. So someone may cut you off in traffic, and you may get very, very angry very, very quickly, and you may want to drive your car into theirs and cause a wreck. The limbic system keeps you from doing that. Okay, so it helps you regulate your emotions. Your primitive emotions that we all have are regulated by the limbic system. So this is where the limbic system is located. It's like in the middle here. You can see the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and then here is the hippocampus below the thalamus and the amygdala. And everything is basically below the corpus callosum, which is that structure that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. All right, there's information on memory, which I'm going to skip because, and I already talked to you about the divisions of the nervous system. So I'm going to, all right, so we're now on section 4, the peripheral nervous system, and really I want to make sure that I go over reflex arc and then the spinal cord, how it's organized. So a reflex arc basically works like this. You have a sensory receptor, like in your skin. For example, if you get a pin pierces your skin, okay, you have a sensory receptor that feels that pain, sends the signal through the dorsal root ganglion. The dorsal root ganglion contains sensory neurons, okay? So sensory neuron signals go through that dorsal root ganglion. Dorsal means it's on the back side of your spinal cord. And then it gets sent to the spinal cord where the signal is integrated. You have interneurons in there that integrate the signal, decide what to do with it. And this all happens very quickly. And then a signal is sent to a motor neuron, and that signal will travel through the ventral root of the spinal cord. So dorsal root is sensory, ventral root is motor. And then that signal will be sent to your muscles, causing you to move. You know, typically if you get, this is the skin, in your hand or your arm, it's going to cause you to flex your arm, because of the pain. So that muscle is called an effector. So you have a sensory receptor, then you have the nerve impulses sent to the dorsal root ganglion, and then to the interneurons, and then the ventral root ganglion is where the motor neurons are, the axons of the motor neurons, and then they will send their signal to the effector, which in this case is a muscle. There's some information about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division. Sympathetic is important during fight or flight responses. When you are fighting for your life, running for your life, it's going to speed up your heart rate. It's going to dilate your bronchi or your airways so that you breathe faster and deeper. Blood will be sent to your muscles. Blood will be diverted to your muscles so that if you do need to run, you can. Then the parasympathetic division is going to be involved when you are relaxed. So any responses associated with relaxation. It's going to promote the processes of digestion, and it's going to retard or slow the heart rate. And so I'm going to stop here. That's good enough.